This tutorial is the annual Christmas card tutorial, and today we are doing a tutorial that is Heinz Chapel. Heinz Chapel, I just miscuted some of the foliage, the leaves on the tree that's in front of the chapel or in front of the big tree trunk. Otherwise, there's not a lot of miscuting. You're going to be using alizarin crimson today. You're going to be using some cadmium red today. You'll be using some burnt umber today. You'll also be using some yellow ochre. You'll be using some cadmium yellow. You'll be using some sap green. You'll be using some cerulean blue. And you'll be using black. For your brushes, we're going to be using a nice wide 2-inch flat. That's going to help fill in all of the sky areas. We'll be using a number 6, a number 4, and a number 2 round. And you're also going to be using your fine rigger, your number 1 rigger, and your very fine liner. We're also going to use a fan brush to splatter at the very end. You'll be using a sponge, and you're going to be using salt. And of course, you will have used some miscut for this. Now you're going to put a wash on the sky area of just some really pale indigo. If you want a little bit of a darker sky, you can add some more blues or indigos. But remember, we have to sponge those nice light colored leaves over this. So you don't want to get too dark or you're going to lose your nice light color in your leaves. You're going to use your big brush and you're going to bring that color all the way down into the area where the hedges are. If you want to blot some of it out to make it look like there are some faint clouds in the sky, that's certainly fine. But otherwise, you can just leave it as is with your nice light indigo. Once you get your foliage in later, if there are sections of the sky that you do want to deepen, you can do that. But I wouldn't get too deep with your indigo color at this point. You can go over your light post. It doesn't matter because it's going to be darker. And then you want to let that dry. I moved my paper around to let it, blend and soften. And then I'm going to dry it, or you want to let it dry really well. Be sure you wipe off your table so that that doesn't come back in on your paper as a washback. Now we're going to put the hedges in first. You have to decide if you want more pink color or more green color in your hedges. If you want more pink, then you do the pink first. If you want more sap green, then you do the sap first. And you sponge the color where you want it. While it's wet, add additional color with a brush. Throw a little bit of salt on. And continue the whole way across. Now you can add your second color, whether it be the sap or the the pink, when the other color is still wet, because it's okay if those two colors bleed together in certain areas. You don't want to lose all of your individual color, but you can have a blended color here and there. Salt it. Be sure that you have an uneven edge along the top of the hedge. You don't want it to be just a perfectly straight manicured hedge. And add your second color. Add some additional color with your brush, and then that way you'll change the intensities of the color. And be sure to do some salting. You want to let that dry well, and then I moved up to start putting the watered down black on the roof of my chapel. All of the roof pieces are just watered down black, not too intensely dark, but just watered down enough that you get like a nice slate gray color. You also want to paint your steeple the same watered down black color, and then we will add some different intensities of black to that steeple later on. Now, before I get into painting the actual chapel, I'm putting in my trees that are in front of the chapel because there's no sense painting the chapel where those nice light pastel-y colored trees are, the real pale sap, the real pale pink. I don't want to deepen those colors because I want them to look like they are the weathered leaves ready to fall off. So I don't want to have a deep color on those trees. I want to have a nice light washed out color. So I'm putting that on first so that I can paint around them when it comes time to put the color on the chapel. Watch this video, you'll see how many trees I've painted in. I'm using watered down sap mixed with a little bit of burnt umber. I'm adding in a little bit of yellow ochre. I'm touching in a little bit of the pinks. You decide what colors you want, and you can also decide where you want these real fine weathered leaves. Now the color of my chapel is going to be watered down burnt umber. You can add a little bit of yellow ochre to that color. It depends on your brand of burnt umber as to how much of a warm color it is or a cool color, or if it's too warm. But if you want to change up the color at all for your burnt umber, just add in a little bit of yellow ochre. I'm painting the entire chapel that color. Windows, everything. Because when you go in to do your windows, they're going to be darker anyway. And anything tree-wise in front of your chapel, your tree trunks and tree branches, they're going to be darker. So I painted in that color around the trees that I already put in and painted the whole chapel that color, of course, other than the roof that I already painted. Dry everything really well and take off any loose salting. My light post, I just put a wash of black on that. This is the first wash. There's going to be other colors. If you did put that wreath on your light post, of course you'll paint around your wreath. And you're only painting parts of the top of the light post. You're not going to paint the insides yet. You're going to paint some of the sections a little bit lighter, not quite as intensely black, but that's the only color that you're going to be using, and you'll be using it in different intensities. Of course, you can follow your picture also. Now I'm going to start to sponge in my trees so that I know where my light foliage will be, so that when I do start to paint in my branches, I'm not going to have my branch cutting off all of my nice fine leaves. You especially want to sponge in the areas where you have your misketing so that it looks like an extension of those. You don't want to have that as something totally separate. I sponged with that same burnt umber mixed with some additional yellow ochre, and then while it's wet, I'm adding in some places that will be more intensely colored with the yellow ochre, and I'll be salting it. I also will be dropping in some very watered down sap green. If you don't want to do that and you want it left as yellow ochre, that's fine. If you want to add burnt umber instead of sap green to make it look like dried brown leaves, that's perfectly fine too. If you want to add in any little bits of pink or red, that's fine also. You decide what coloring you want for this, but you want to just start to sponge it in now so that that's one less thing that we're dealing with later. Be sure that you salt it, and where you've salted, you can also drop in some paint. It'll follow your salt. And give you some additional texturing. But you want to make sure that it's dark enough that you can see it, but you don't have to make it so dark that it takes away from all of the lighter tree colors that we've already put down. Now I'm going to be painting in my dark windows. My windows are simply watered down black. The bigger windows that are really visible, not the ones behind trees or behind leaves or the real small ones, but the bigger windows, when I painted them in, I let the paint get to a little bit of a matte finish, and then I lightly textured it with a Kleenex. That made it look as if there were different sections to the glass, and of course made it look like it was more of a stained glass where there are different colors, even though we are not putting in different colors. But it gave the look of different sections to the glass. I painted around all of my leaves, or of course painted over my biscuit. Painted them in with a nice watered down black, not too light, not too dark. And then don't worry about all of the fine framing of all of the windows. We're going to do all of that fine lining later with some Chinese white mixed with a little bit of umber. So all of those window sections that are framed, you will do all of that framing work later. Don't try to paint around all of those little sections and lines. You want to give that time to dry, and you want to decide now whether you want your grassy area to have snow on it or if you want it to be green grass. I'm choosing to make mine as snow-covered grass, so all I'm doing on mine is dry brushing it with a little bit of cerulean blue to give it that hint of the blue snow. I'm not putting in green grass. You're going to finish putting in all of your windows, and then there are a couple sections where those windows are set way back in. Those alcove areas have to have a shadow to them because the window sits way back into the, into the chapel. So you're going to wet that alcove area, and then with some black, you're going to repaint the window, and you're going to take that watered down black out to the edge of that alcove. You're going to add more black to the window area, allow it to bleed out into that alcove area until it is shadowed enough for you that it looks like that window has been set back in. Soften the edge with water. If it needs more while it's wet, go ahead and add some additional black and allow it to bleed and blend into the water. If it's starting to dry, do not try to add more. Wait until it dries and just repeat the process. So if it's starting to dry, then do not try to add. Wait till it's dry, because if you try to add when it's just starting to dry, you're going to get a washback. Now, following your picture, and if you take it just section by section, you'll see where all of the little detail work needs to be. The little designs, that you see, you don't have to get real technical with that because this chapel is way in the distance. So you're not going to see every little detail. However, there are shadows on half of the columns. There are lines. There are little intricate designs within the cement on the chapel. You can just do little squiggle lines with that kind of stuff. You don't have to try to figure out what the exact design was. You just want your eye to tell whoever's looking at this that yes, there is some intricate work on the cement part, and just your little lines will show all of that. Of course, you don't have to worry about anything that is behind your misketing or your foliage, which, saves you from doing a lot of maybe some of the real detailed work. But again, when you're doing some of your detail work, you're going to be working in different values of your black. Some of the things will be much darker. Other things will just be real pale lines, real pale squiggle lines. Look at your picture. Just take it section by section. Do the far left section, the middle left section, the front section, then, move your way across the chapel. Do a little bit at a time. You might not need as much as you think you do. Watch the video a little bit at a time, and you can just follow along and do the details that I did, or you can actually just fast forward the video through some of this detail stuff and just follow your picture in your own time. Now, painting in this nice big tree trunk, I used some black and some burnt umber. Only the biggest tree trunk gets some salt. I'm not going to be salting all the little branches, but there are a few trees. The biggest tree trunk will be the most intense in color. As I move towards the back of the painting, that color lessens in intensity, and but it's the same color. It's black mixed with some burnt umber. Paint in all of your tree trunks first with your biggest branches, and then later on you can use your rigger for your finer branches and your real small liner for the finest branches. I'm removing most of my salt because when I start to work with my rigger, it's much easier to paint without a lot of salt on your paper, because being that it's a fine rigger, it will skip sections when it's going over the salt, and then you don't get paint down where you need it to be. So take off as much salt as you possibly can when you start to work with your rigger for your finer branches. I'm doing my finer branches with my rigger, and then my very finest branches, which can be done at any time, those will get put in with my real fine liner. Look at your picture. There is a lot of fine branches. That's what fills in a lot of your background. So you want to make sure that you are putting in enough branches to substantiate all of your sponged foliage. I'm adding another wash to my main tree trunk just to make it stand out and also to tone down some of the salting. Same color, umber and black, but now this wash I will not salt. Lots and lots of fine branches, lots. It's going to fill in that section for you and make it look much more realistic because of all of the foliage that we have. You also need to put branches in for your hedges. You can't have a full hedge and it just growing in the air. So you need to put some nice branches down at the bottom of your painting. If you want to leave that as snow that you see through your hedges, that's fine. Otherwise, you can fill it in with some sap or some sap mixed with a little bit of black. If you want to see your tree trunks through your hedges, then you want to make sure that you put that color in the holes that you would see where the tree trunks would be behind those holes. It's up to you. You have many options here, and it's not something that you have to do right now. So it's something that you can think about. Now I'm going to be using my Chinese white. I'm going to mix it with a little bit of umber. It'll give you a tan color, but because it's mixed with your white, you will be able to see it when you start to put in those little detail lines in your windows. Use your finest little liner, and you're just going to paint in those fine, it's actually, cement sections that are separating out your windows, but you're just going to do that with your finest liner, and you're just going to follow your picture. Don't try to get all of the details. I mean, if you do a couple lines and a couple squiggles, that's all that you need, because that's just showing that those windows are very ornate, but you don't have to get the exact designs. Now I'm starting to be all over the place, adding my little darker designs to the peaks to my columns. I will add more branches where I feel I need more branches. All those little details that I said you can do at any time, well, now I'm starting to do them. Just look at your picture. You'll be able to obviously see where you need something, and that's where you'll add it. If you've worked on this for quite a while, you might want to take a break and come back to it in a couple hours, or actually even another day. Don't get, don't let this picture get to you with all of the detail. Painting in the wreath, my wreath, sap green, and while it's wet, I put on some salt and then I dropped a little bit of black into the salting and let the black move through my salt. The ribbon is going to be red, and once that is all dry, I will do a little bit of shadowing on my ribbon just to give it some dimension. Now to give just a little bit more detail to my leaves on my tree, I'm going to splatter with my fan brush. I'm using the same coloring, so I'm using my same yellow ochre, I'm using my same sap green, mixing those together, watering it down. I don't want these leaves to be too intensely dark, and I am just splattering here and there. Don't go crazy with your splattering. Keep it close to the paper so that you don't splatter everywhere. And once I've splattered, you can also blot it lightly with a Kleenex. But this splattering will give you just a little bit more detail to your, your dried leaves on your tree. Everything really, really well. Remove most of your salt, and now I'm going to take off my misketing. This was the misketing that was in front of my tree or in front of my chapel. And once all of that misket is removed, I will paint in the misket with the same coloring that I used for the dried leaves to begin with, my yellow ochre and my sap. Add in some extra little branches through your misketed areas if you need to. You don't want to leave them without any branches. Use your fine brushes. Don't get anything too fat through there. The light inside your lamppost, I shadowed the left side of that, and I'll put a little bit of a shadow on the inside of the light post ceiling, or whatever you want to call that, that's holding that light in there. Put a little bit of shadow up in there. But other than that, I really didn't do too much with my light post. I had painted all the sections of the light post separately, so they're kind of separated out because of how it was painted. But that's really all you want to do with your light post. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time with that. Take a little break away from this. Come back to it after a few hours, and you'll be able to tell right away where you need something or where you need to add some more branches or not. Less is better. Don't overdo it. You want this to be a nice, light, crisp painting. If you add too much, it's going to look too heavy. Another Pittsburgh Christmas card in the history books. Now sit back and enjoy. Happy painting!